I want you to just take a second and picture your absolute safest space. Like, really think about your home.
Right, the place you can finally exhale.
Exactly. The place where you drop your bags, lock the door, and you just get to be
A
yourself.
total sanctuary.
Yeah. But now I want you to imagine walking through that front door, putting down your keys, and realizing that inexplicably you feel like a total stranger inside it.
Oh, wow. That's deeply unsettling.
Right. I mean, the walls are exactly the same, the furniture is yours, but you suddenly feel just entirely out of
That
place.
you don't belong there at all.
Exactly. It's this profoundly eerie, almost sickening sensation. And that specific unsettling feeling, being a stranger in your own living room, is exactly what this deep dive is going to explore today.
It really gets under your skin, that idea. We're so conditioned to think of home as a fixed coordinate on a map.
Right, a permanent thing.
Yeah, a permanent sanctuary. But what we're digging into today is, well, what happens when that coordinate constantly shifts beneath your feet?
Hmm.
And, the psychological toll that takes on a person's identity.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really get to the bottom of this phenomenon, we are using a fascinating framework from an article by researcher Ali El Abdellaoui.
From the 2026 Confluence Journal.
Yes, exactly. And we're looking at these really profound concepts of otherness and unhomeliness. We're doing this through the lens of two remarkable Moroccan transnational novels.
Laila Lalami's The Other Americans and Leila Slimani's The Country of Others.
You got it. But don't worry, we aren't doing some dry literary critique today.
No, definitely not.
We are using these stories as a mission to decode the actual psychology of displacement. We want to know how our identities actually survive when the borders of race, gender, and geography are constantly shifting around us.
It's such a massive topic.
Yeah.
Because to understand the sheer weight of what the characters in these novels are going through, we really have to start with that baseline feeling you just described.
The stranger in your own house feeling.
Right, that glitch in the matrix. The physical building is the same, but the emotional gravity it's been shut off.
It actually reminds me of that feeling when you go back to visit your high school as an adult.
Oh, yeah. That is exactly it.
Like, you walk through the doors, lockers are exactly where you left them, it smells the same, but you feel like a total imposter.
You're walking around like a ghost.
Yeah. You don't belong there anymore, even though it used to be your entire world. It's a very specific kind of ghostliness.
Well, that micro example actually scales up perfectly into what Sigmund Freud called das Unheimlich, or, the uncanny.
Oh, right. The uncanny valley kind of thing.
Sort of, yeah. Back in 1919, Freud wasn't talking about ghosts or haunted houses when he explored the uncanny. He was talking about the terrifying moment when something intimately familiar suddenly becomes fundamentally alien.
And frightening.
Yes. It's the total negation of comfort. It's not that the bed is hiding a monster, it's that the bed itself feels wrong.
But it goes deeper than just a creepy feeling, right? Because the source brings in the philosopher Martin Heidegger.
Right. Heidegger takes it to a whole other level.
Yeah, he argued that this feeling isn't a glitch at all. It's actually our default setting.
Which is pretty bleak, honestly. Heidegger takes it straight into existential dread. He argues that human existence is essentially marked by a state of not being at home in the world.
So we're just fundamentally anxious?
Basically. Our day-to-day comfort, our familiarity with our surroundings, it's all incredibly fragile.
Wow.
When we experience deep existential anxiety, that thin veneer of comfort is just ripped away. We are suddenly forced to realize how detached and, well, fundamentally estranged we are from everything around us.
So if that baseline anxiety is just waiting to be triggered for all of us anyway, what happens when you throw actual physical migration into the mix?
Oh, it magnifies it completely.
Like, if you move across the world, you're practically inviting that existential crisis in for dinner.
Which is exactly what the post-colonial thinker, Bhabha, realized. He took Freud and Heidegger's ideas and just dropped them right into the modern globalized world.
And he retranslated the uncanny as the unhomely, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
When people migrate, when they cross these cultural borders, Bhabha argues they experience a freak displacement. You are thrust into this liminal condition.
Liminal meaning, like an in-between space.
Right. You can be standing in your newly purchased home, but because your cultural identity is caught between two totally different worlds, you feel entirely estranged.
That is so profound.
You are fundamentally unhomed by the very act of trying to build a new home.
But, that invisible feeling of being unhomed doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It's not just you sitting alone in a room feeling weird.
No, it's very reactive.
Right. It's usually triggered by the people around you actively pushing you out. They are the ones reminding you that you don't belong.
Which brings us to the mechanics of how people are treated in these spaces.
Exactly. The concept of otherness.
And this requires a quick philosophical detour. I promise it won't be too dense.
We love a philosophical detour.
Because understanding how otherness works explains just so much of our modern social friction. The source traces the idea of the self versus the other, starting with Descartes.
The classic, I think, therefore I am.
Right, which really centers the individual ego. But it's actually Hegel who reveals the terrifying mechanic of how identity is forged.
With the master-slave dialectic.
Yes, Hegel argued that human self-awareness cannot exist in isolation. It literally only exists when it is recognized by someone else.
Think about it like a conversation, right? If you walk into a room and start speaking, but every single person just stares at you blankly and refuses to acknowledge you made a sound.
Your reality starts to fracture.
Exactly. You actually need a mirror, another person's recognition to confirm your own existence.
And Hegel realized that, historically, humanity is terrible at sharing that mirror.
We really are.
Instead of mutual recognition, it almost always creates this brutal power dynamic. One group positions themselves as the dominant essential self, and they actively reduce the second group to the inferior inessential other.
Meaning you only get to exist in relation to them.
Exactly. Then Simone de Beauvoir takes that exact framework in 1949 with The Second Sex and applies it directly to gender.
Which was revolutionary.
Huge. She looks at philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas, who essentially argued that woman is the absolute other by nature.
Which she vehemently rejects.
Oh, absolutely. De Beauvoir points out that men have historically hoarded the position of the essential one while systematically forcing women into the role of the inessential other.
So it's not biology, it's just a rigged social mechanism.
Precisely. Now, Hegel believed that eventually society should evolve to reach reciprocal recognition.
Where both sides view each other as absolute equals.
Right, both subjects and objects. But de Beauvoir looks at the reality of patriarchal society and realizes that waiting for perfect symmetry is just a naive endeavor.
The power dynamics are far too entrenched for the dominant group to simply hand over equality.
Exactly. They aren't going to give up the mirror voluntarily.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure, go for it.
If de Beauvoir says perfect equality is basically a pipe dream in a deeply unequal society, what is her actual solution? Because the alternative the source mentions is reciprocal otherness.
Yes.
If society pushes you away, you just push back. I mean, it sounds incredibly combative, like you're just fighting fire with fire instead of trying to actually fix the system.
Well, what's fascinating here is that de Beauvoir completely owns the fact that it's a defensive, pragmatic strategy.
Oh, really? She admits it's defensive.
Yeah, it is not about creating a flawless utopia. It is about pure survival. If you are a marginalized person, especially someone facing double discrimination for both race and gender, waiting for the dominant culture to politely recognize your humanity is a losing game.
That makes a lot of sad sense.
Reciprocal otherness is a survival mechanism to reclaim your agency. You basically refuse to be the passive object in someone else's story.
So you look back at the oppressor and say what?
You essentially say, you might view me as the other, but I also view you as the other. You set up a reciprocal claim to your own consciousness. You take the mirror back by force.
You stop letting them define the terms of reality? Wow, that is powerful.
It really is.
So let's see what happens when we pull this out of the realm of abstract theory and, drop it into a vivid modern reality. We can see this exact survival mechanism play out with the first protagonist.
Nora, from Laila Lalami's The Other Americans.
Right. Nora's life in California is just a masterclass in the exhausting struggle of the unhomely.
It really is. She is born to Moroccan immigrant parents, but her initial strategy isn't reciprocal otherness at all.
No, her primary drive is desperate, total assimilation.
She throws absolutely everything she has at fitting in.
She tries to mold herself into the archetypal American girl. She goes to nightclubs, she drinks, she immerses herself in pop culture, like reading Frank Miller comics.
She's performing the identity of the dominant culture flawlessly.
But society simply refuses to let her be the self. They just keep shoving her back into the box of the other.
And it's relentless. As a child, she deals with the overt, horrific racism of being called a raghead Taliban.
Just awful.
But as she grows into adulthood, the mechanism of othering mutates. It becomes highly sexualized.
Yeah, the source points out a deeply uncomfortable scene in the novel that illustrates this perfectly. It involves Nora's boyfriend, Jeremy, and his American friend, Fierro.
That interaction is just brutal to read.
Fierro casually asks if Nora is Mexican, and when Jeremy corrects him and says she's Moroccan, Fierro acts like he's never even heard the word.
He doesn't ask about her culture at all.
No, he immediately bypasses her humanity entirely and asks Jeremy if he slept with her using a vile racial slur. He calls her a Haji pussy.
In that single moment, Fierro entirely reduces her to an exotic commodity to be consumed. Her specific cultural identity is totally irrelevant to him.
She is just hit with the crushing weight of double otherness.
Exactly. Diminished by patriarchy because she is a woman, and exoticized by a Eurocentric gaze because she is Moroccan.
And the unhomeliness reaches a terrifying peak with the central tragedy of the novel, which is the murder of Nora's father by a local family, the Andersons.
Right. And the author grounds the Andersons' hostility in a very specific, deeply entrenched worldview.
And we are just imparting what the source material describes here, but the novel portrays the father as holding a profound resentment toward immigrants.
Yes. The source notes that he genuinely believed newcomers are fundamentally changing this place without asking his permission.
And he is enraged by the expectation that he should be accommodating.
His son, AJ, is a direct reflection of that hostility in the book. The source details how he frequently uses overt racial slurs, even against the detective investigating the murder.
And AJ expresses sheer, indignant disbelief that Nora even dares to file a lawsuit against him.
Because in his mind, according to the novel, she's an intruder who barely belongs in the country, let alone someone who possesses the right to hold him accountable.
It just shows how the dominant culture violently resists anyone it perceives as a threat to its status as the self. And again, that's just objectively reporting the societal racial friction depicted in the text.
Absolutely. It's societal violence that forces Nora into an intense state of unhomeliness.
The country she was born in, the country she bent over backwards to assimilate into, actively rejects her. But, here's the real tragedy of Nora's story.
She doesn't just face that unhomeliness out in American society.
Exactly. She faces it the exact moment she walks through her own family's front door.
She gets absolute no reprieve at home. Her mother, Miriam, relentlessly tries to force Nora into very rigid, traditional patriarchal scripts.
Miriam expects Nora to emulate her more compliant sister, to pursue a prestigious, safe career like law or medicine.
And most importantly, to marry a respectable Muslim doctor or engineer.
So Nora is caught in this impossible vice grip. Her refusal to conform to those traditional expectations means she feels completely alienated from her Moroccan roots, too.
She is rejected by America for being too Moroccan and rejected by her own family for being too American.
She is just floating in the void. So what does this all mean? How does she actually break out of this? How do you survive when both of your worlds reject you?
Well, this is where we see that theoretical idea of reciprocal otherness turn into action.
Okay, how so?
Nora utilizes a mechanism called border thinking, or what the Moroccan sociologist Abdelkabir Khatibi refers to as double critique.
Double critique.
Right. Because Nora exists in this liminal, unhomely space between two distinct worlds, she develops a unique, penetrating vantage point. She can clearly see the structural flaws and hypocrisies in both systems.
She essentially uses her state of in-betweenness as a tool to dismantle their power over her.
Exactly. She uses it to issue a double critique. She critiques the conditional humanity offered by America, a society where, in the novel, a white man's humanity is an assumed baseline, but a Moroccan man's humanity must be constantly proven and justified.
Right.
And at the very same time, she critiques the suffocating patriarchal conformity of her Moroccan heritage.
So she just stops trying to mold herself to fit their mirrors.
She reclaims her agency, she pursues a passion for music instead of a safe medical career, and she marries Jeremy, the partner she chooses for herself, directly defying her mother's rigid expectations.
She stops searching for a pre-made home that will accept her and starts building her own reality on her own terms.
It's a really powerful arc of taking back control.
It is. But it raises an interesting question about directionality, I think. Nora shows us the brutal struggle of moving west, right? Trying to integrate into a dominant Eurocentric culture.
Yeah.
What happens when we completely reverse the trajectory? Let's flip the map and look at the second novel, Leila Slimani's The Country of Others.
We shift focus to a character named Mathilde.
Right. Mathilde is a white European French woman who moves to North Africa.
The historical context of Mathilde's story changes the variables entirely. It is 1944. Mathilde marries Amin, a Moroccan soldier who bravely fought for the French army during the war.
And she leaves Europe and moves with him to a rural village in Morocco.
During the French protectorate era, they are stepping into a society that is literally a powder keg of colonial tension.
And just like Nora, Mathilde genuinely tries to bridge the gap at first. She puts in the work to integrate.
She really does. She learns Darija, the local Arabic dialect. She converts to Islam.
When anti-French violence starts erupting in the streets due to colonial pushback, she even obscures her European identity entirely. She hides beneath a traditional melhaf just so she can walk outside safely.
But despite checking all the boxes of assimilation, she is slammed by a stunning, multi-layered wall of otherness from literally every direction.
She is besieged on 3 distinct fronts.
First, the rejection comes from her own husband.
Which is heartbreaking.
Back in France, away from the societal pressures of his homeland, Amin was a gentle, romantic partner. But the moment they settle in Morocco, he transforms.
He becomes increasingly dictatorial and physically abusive.
Right. Amin feels a suffocating social pressure to prove to his patriarchal community that his masculinity hasn't been compromised by marrying a European woman.
He brutalizes Mathilde to assert his dominance and signal to his peers that he isn't a traitor.
Then she gets hit by the second front, his family.
Amin's mother, Moula, embodies the traditional submissive role expected of women in that specific cultural context.
And Mathilde, by contrast, is highly emancipated. She's loud, she's independent.
The family views her mere presence as a massive disruptive cultural transgression.
But the third, and perhaps most surprising, layer of otherness comes from the French elite who live in Morocco.
Right, you might assume they would embrace Mathilde as one of their own, a fellow European.
Instead, they ruthlessly mock her and cast her out. The source details a highly revealing scene set at a local hairdresser.
Oh, this scene is so telling.
A French man named Eugene and several French women openly taunt Mathilde. They mock her physical appearance, ridiculing her for being taller than her husband.
They laugh at her big, faded leather men's shoes, basically stripping away her femininity.
And most cuttingly, they socially ostracize her for the perceived crime of marrying an indigent native.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like Mathilde walked into colonial Morocco fully expecting her race to automatically make her the director of the play.
She thought she would have the inherent power of the colonizer.
But the second she arrives, the script flips. She realizes she is just an extra getting violently pushed around on 3 completely different stages.
She is reduced to a subordinate woman to her husband, an alien foreigner to his family, and a class traitor to the French elite.
That captures her disorientation perfectly. She is systematically stripped of her European privilege, her personal freedom, and her social status.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where de Beauvoir's reciprocal claim comes roaring back into focus.
Because Mathilde refuses to remain a passive victim trapped on those 3 stages.
She fights back to reclaim the mirror.
Exactly. She does it through direct defiance. Against Amin's explicit dictatorial orders, she opens a small medical clinic to treat local women.
She completely rejects the role of the silent, obedient, submissive housewife. She physically carves out a space where she has authority and autonomy.
But, and we have to report this impartially based on the source, her resistance isn't a clean, heroic narrative.
Not at all.
The novel paints a very complicated picture of how she takes that power back, because Mathilde fights back against her marginalization by actively othering the local Moroccan population.
She leans heavily into highly problematic Eurocentric views.
Her method of survival is steeped in colonial superiority.
Yeah, she imposes harsh judgments on the local customs. The source notes she dismissively refers to the sacred Eid celebration as a feast of savages.
And she looks at the local women, including her own mother-in-law, not with solidarity, but with pity and superiority. She views their traditional domestic lives as a literal form of slavery.
She absolutely refuses to be the silent other, but her weapon of choice is to wield her own colonial judgments to diminish the people around her.
It's a messy, uncomfortable reality. It demonstrates that being a victim of severe oppression in your own home doesn't magically immunize you from perpetuating oppression against others.
Survival can be incredibly ruthless. It complicates the idea of the hero.
Right. Both Nora and Mathilde are deeply flawed, real human beings reacting to the crushing pressure of the unhomely.
So bringing all of these threads together, I think the core insight for you listening to this deep dive is this. We need to stop viewing home as a fixed utopian safe haven.
For transnational individuals, and increasingly for all of us in a globalized world, home is fluid.
It is fiercely contested.
It is deeply entangled with the complex, invisible power dynamics of race, class, and gender. But the stories of Nora and Mathilde prove something absolutely vital.
Even when society actively tries to erase you, even when you are pushed into the absolute margins of the unhomely, you could still carve out a space of resistance.
You don't have to accept the glitch.
They show us that you can always refuse the role of the passive object. You can demand to be the subject of your own life, even when the cost of that demand is profound alienation.
Which brings up a completely new thought I want to leave you with, building on everything we've just discussed today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spent this entire time unpacking Bhabha's theory of the unhomely, which is rooted in people crossing physical borders, right? Migrating across oceans and continents and feeling deeply estranged.
Right. Physical displacement.
But think about the reality of the world today. We are constantly migrating across digital borders.
Oh, wow.
We spend hours every single day curating these transnational, highly manicured identities on social media. We endlessly jump from platform to platform, slipping in and out of different digital avatars.
If we apply the concept of the unhomely to the internet, the implications are staggering.
Exactly. If moving our physical bodies across the globe creates a liminal space that makes us feel existentially estranged, could our constant frantic shifting between digital avatars be creating a completely new, modern era of unhomeliness?
That makes so much sense.
We spend hours meticulously building these digital homes, our profiles, our feeds, only to lock our screens and suddenly feel entirely disconnected from our actual physical reality.
Could the next frontier of feeling not at home in the world be happening right now, inside the glowing devices in our pockets?
It raises a terrifying question, honestly. Are we actively unhoming ourselves, fracturing our own identities every single time we log on?
It is definitely something to mull over the next time you put your keys down and pull out your phone.
I really want to encourage you to critically examine where you truly feel at home and who holds the power in that space. Think about that front door from the very beginning of our deep dive. When you walk through it, do you still recognize the person standing inside? Thank you for exploring the shifting borders of identity and survival with us today. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions.